Hey everyone, how's it going? So I'm here for the My Pleasure book tag. I was tagged in this a little while back by Sean the Book Maniac, and this was created by Steve Partridge, and I will leave links to both of their videos. Yeah, anyway, I will get right to the questions. The first is Think, a book that made you think hard. And for me, this is a very recent one, Phantoms in the Brain, Probing the Mysteries of the Human Mind by V.S. Ramachandran. V.S. Ramachandran is a medical doctor as well as a neurologist, and this is a book that reports on a series of cases that he has either worked on or done research on of people with brain damage. And it kind of honestly, just the weirdness of some of the experiences of these people in this book, just the strange things that it reveals about the human brain just honestly threw me into a little bit of an existential crisis, because I was starting to think that consciousness and the self are an illusion, and I'm still kind of in the midst of that existential crisis. But no, the most famous case in here is, of course, phantom limb syndrome, where a person who has had their arm severed in some way or another, either through medical operation or through an accident, will feel like they still have an arm. So they will, their brain will be telling them that they have an arm even though it has been severed, and they might be able to move it and even feel like they can manipulate fingers, and yeah, that's just strange. And then there's the opposite, where someone will have a stroke in one side of their brain, and they will be paralyzed on one side of their body, and they will actually deny ownership of an arm that is still attached to them. So they will come up with these weird, what are called confabulations in neuroscience, about that arm that they claim doesn't belong to them. They'll say, oh yeah, that's my brother's arm, or something, even though it's attached to them. And they even maybe come up with confabulations about why it got there. There's a woman that he describes who has damage to her visual centers of the brain, and if she looked at a slot, like a mail slot, she could not tell you if it was vertical or horizontal or diagonal or whatever, but if you asked her to take a letter and put it in, she would do it perfectly. So, I don't know, there's so many weird things about the human brain, and I don't know, if you're gonna read a book about the human brain, like, at this point, I'm gonna just say, just go to this book, because it kind of blew my mind. Even though I've learned about neuroscience in the past, it's not exactly my forte, but I have learned about it. Even so, this book has blown up my brain, my own brain. A book about brains blew up my brain. Go figure. But yeah, V.S. Ramachandran, I highly recommend. Number 2, Love, a book that broke or mended your heart. For this, I'm going with Tessa the D'Urbervilles with a lovely buy, used, and save sticker on it. I read this for class on Thomas Hardy and D.H. Lawrence, and yeah, it made me cry. It's about this girl who is living in a fictional county of Wessex, England in the 1800s, and she basically just can't get a break. She gets raped early on in the novel, and basically things just go downhill from there. And yeah, it made me cry, and books don't often do that. And it ends very sadly. Yeah, anyway, Tessa the D'Urbervilles. Number 3, Eat, a book that nourishes you. And for this, I'm going to go with the book that I talked about in my last tag video, my 20th Century American Poetry collection, anthology. So I'm going to go to any anthology to just read a poem when I have no other volume of poetry to read. It's usually this one. Again, I don't know what it is about 20th Century American poetry, but something about it just really resonates with me. And so, yeah, basically anywhere I turn to in this book, I'll probably find something that I'll be happy to be reading, even if it doesn't necessarily become a new favorite poem or something. And I have found many favorite poets in here. I read T.S. Eliot, I think, for the first time in here. I think I may have read Wallace Stevens for the first time in here. I think I may have read William Carlos Williams for the first time in here. Yeah, anyway, this is a book that nourishes me. If I need poetry, that is. Number 4, Laugh, a book that brought a little comic relief. Now, I rarely read funny books. But a book that I think, or a play that I think is quite funny is Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. And obviously it's funny in a bit of a depressing way, sort of, because of the heady existential themes that it deals with. But I mean, if you're watching it, it is just a funny thing, a funny play. I don't know. Yeah, but that was a hard question for me to find an answer to, since I don't read things that are that funny. But this definitely, at least if you see it in production, I think it can be pretty funny. So yeah. Number 5, Sex, a book that explores or contains sexuality that doesn't make you cringe. And for this, I'm going with Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. I actually also read this as a part of that same class that I read the Thomas Hardy book in. It was a class about Thomas Hardy and D.H. Lawrence. Yeah, so this is about Constance, who is, I can't remember her name escapes me at the moment, but she marries an upper-class man in early 20th century Britain, and he is paralyzed in war, and and then she kind of doesn't find their relationship very fulfilling and starts a relationship with a coal miner, and there's many descriptions of her sexual endeavors with this coal miner, and there's not much that's very explicit in here, even though it was banned for a while because of the sex in it. But by today's standards, it's quite tame. But I like that. It makes it a bit more, I guess, stylized, a bit easier to enjoy, and obviously not cringeworthy, which is the point of this question. So yeah, Lady Chatterley's Lover. Next, number 6, Rest, a book that gave you peace, reflection, or just calms you down. Now for this, I went with the reflection part of that question, and it's kind of personal to me, but I went with Letters to a Young Scientist by Edward O. Wilson. Edward O. Wilson is had quite a distinguished career in biology. My brother studies wildlife ecology. He's in a PhD program right now, and he kind of idolizes Edward O. Wilson. My brother gave me this book, actually, and when he gave it to me, he was kind of gushing about Edward O. Wilson, and I had never heard of him. But yeah, this is just a book about being a scientist, how to be a scientist, how to be a good scientist, how to find your field in science to study, and many other things. And it just made me kind of, because, I'm an aspiring scientist, and so it made me kind of sit back and reflect on where I'm going with my career. It maybe didn't make me, it didn't cause me to change any of my my career plans, certainly, but it did make me kind of, take a step back and look at everything I'm doing and the direction I'm going critically, at least for a minute. And, I think that qualifies as an answer to this question. So, yeah, Letters to a Young Scientist. And lastly, is Experience, a book that introduced you to a new subject or shifted your perspective. And I went with the introduced you to a new subject part of that prompt. And I went with Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom. I've expressed my criticisms of this book. I do not think it's perfect, but I do credit Harold Bloom with getting me into Shakespeare and making me passionate about Shakespeare in like a genuine, heartfelt way, not like a way where I was reading Shakespeare just because he was Shakespeare and it was like required reading, sort of. I read Shakespeare, I think, for pleasure now because I was exposed to Harold Bloom, and yeah, I will be grateful to Harold Bloom for that for ages, even if I didn't necessarily end up loving every page of his book. So yeah, anyway, that is the My Pleasure book tag. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for tagging me, Sean, and I will see y'all soon. Bye!